Hello, welcome. In this video, I'm going to be kind of talking about some of the reasons why you should read speculative fiction, or more specifically, science fiction. I'm going to be using those terms interchangeably. I know they're technically different, but in this video, again, we're just going to go through some of the big bullet points. I'm going to list off some interesting quotes or interesting comments on science fiction. And hopefully this helps illustrate why I'm so passionate about speculative fiction or science fiction and why you should be too. So with that said, let's start off with kind of one of the big reasons. First off, SF is still expanding. There are plenty of new writers in SF who are exploring and designing new worlds. If you envision SF as purely aliens and cyberpunk as Isaac Asimov and Bradbury and stuff like that, it might be worthwhile to pick up some of the newer anthologies or explore subgenres that look at subgenres such as solarpunk. There are tons of niche collections if you know where to look. Many of these new works blend different genres and approach in novel ways. Don't just look for the kind of big sellers on Amazon. It's really interesting to look at some of the smaller anthologies and some of the stuff that's being put out there because that's where a lot of the kind of rich new material is. So a quote from China Mieville on this kind of topic of kind of new things coming out. He says, "The critic Gabe Chouinard has said that we're entering a new period, a renaissance in the creative radicalism of fantasy that hasn't been seen since the new wave of the 60s and 70s, and an echo of which he has christened the new wave. I don't know if he's right, but I'm excited. This is a radical literature. It's the literature we most deserve." The second reason to read SF is it really helps you kind of think critically about technology. Arguably one of the main purposes of SF. SF allows us to think critically about algorithms, artificial intelligence, big data, space travel, all sorts of science stuff, ecology, psychology, much more, right? Items from SF often go on to be replicated to some extent by real-world engineers. You can think of how many little things like in Star Trek and stuff like that, or other sci-fi series get picked up and imitated by engineers down the road. And so a couple quotes from one of my favorite non-SF novels that has a lot of SF stuff in it. Kurt Vonnegut's God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater. "I love you, sons of... You're all I read anymore. You're the only ones who will talk..." And this is in the novel where he's talking to a collection of science fiction writers. "You're the only ones who will talk about all the really terrific changes going on. The only ones crazy enough to know that life is a space voyage, and not a short one either, but one that'll last for billions of years. You're the only ones with the guts enough to really care about the future, who really notice what machines do to us, what wars do to us, what cities do to us, what big, simple ideas do to us, what tremendous misunderstanding, mistakes, accidents, catastrophes do to us. You're the only one zany enough to agonize over time and distance without limit, over mysteries that will never die, over the fact that we are right now determining whether the space voyage for the next billion years or so is going to be heaven or hell." And another passage from that same novel, Elliot, the protagonist, admitted later that science fiction writers couldn't write for sour apples, but he declared that it didn't matter. He said they were poets just the same since they were more sensitive to important changes than anybody who is writing well. The next big reason to read SF is because it provides alternatives to the future. Speculative fiction allows us to imagine alternate worlds. Imagination is critical to social change. The work of Mark Fisher highlights how, when it is impossible to imagine an alternative, it's impossible to achieve an alternative. While dystopias may be the trend in high school curriculums, utopias in different societies are popular topics in modern SF. We're not just looking at dystopias anymore. We're looking at different ways of being and whole different kind of setups. Right on my cap, I have a Left Hand of Darkness one right there. Not a dystopia by any means, but it allows you to think critically about kind of those big things we talked about in the earlier section, but also seeing kind of possible different ways of being, right? Speaking of Le Guin, I have a quote from one of her speeches when she spoke at an award ceremony. And she said, "Hard times are coming, when we'll be wanting the voices of writers who can see alternatives to how we live now, can see through our fear-stricken society and its obsessive technologies to other ways of being. We'll need writers who can remember freedom, poets, visionaries, realists of larger reality." Additionally, I have a quote from Adrienne Marie Brown here. "All social justice work is science fiction. We're imagining a world free of injustice, a world that doesn't yet exist." And another quote from Jeff Chang: "Those concerned with justice and liberation must always persuade the mass of people that a better world is possible. Our job begins with speculative fictions that fires society's imagination and its desire for change." And finally, there may just be some life lessons in SF, like everything, right? And hopefully, of course, it's enjoyable too. Reading SF is not just about alternatives or thinking about new technology. It, like every piece of literature, can help you think more critically about life in general, contain all sorts of wisdom, and can help entertain you. And with that said, I want to end with kind of a longer passage from a Octavia Butler novel called Parable of the Sower, which if you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend you read it. It should be number one on your to-read priority list if you haven't yet. And so here's kind of a longer passage from it. "Maybe Olivar, which is like this big kind of company town, almost like this kind of Amazon conglomerate company town society all in one. Maybe Olivar is the future, one face of it. Cities controlled by big companies are old hat in science fiction. My grandmother left a whole bookcase of old science fiction novels. The company-city subgenre always seemed to star a hero who outsmarted, overthrew, or escaped, quote, the company. I've never seen one where the hero fought like hell to get taken in and underpaid by the company. In real life, that's the way it'll be. That's the way it is." And later on in that same section in the book, "Tell me what I can do that won't get me in trouble or make everyone think I'm crazy. Just tell me something." At last, "Have you read all your family's books? Some of them, not all. They aren't all worth reading. Books aren't going to save us. Nothing is going to save us if we don't save ourselves. We're dead. Now use your imagination. Is there anything on your family bookshelves that might help you if you're stuck outside? No. You answered too fast. Go home and look again. And like I said, use your imagination. Any kind of survival information from encyclopedias, biographies, anything that helps you learn to live off the land and defend ourselves, even some fiction, might be useful." Again, great book. Really recommend it. But Octavia Butler, the author of it, is really kind of implying there that, reading anything is going to help you kind of learn a little bit about life, and even fiction can have kind of bigger ideas in it that can help you out, right? And last but not least, the reason for reading SF is that it's enjoyable, it's fun. If you really haven't explored the genre, I encourage you to do so. And if you have explored the genre before, but you haven't seen many of the kind of authors and subgenres that we look at on this channel, I encourage you to explore those, just because there's a lot of neat stuff happening out there that you're not going to see necessarily in kind of the quote-unquote mainstream sections of science fiction and speculative fiction. With that said, thanks for watching the video. If you like this video, please subscribe and check out other videos on this channel, and do what you can to support kind of lesser known works of speculative fiction and science fiction. Thanks.